Good morning, ladies. So happy to see you all here on this maybe rainy day. Welcome to our March program. This is our last speaker for the club year, and I can tell by our good attendance that the topic resonates with a lot of you. I can see that everybody wants to have their ducks in a row, and we all want to know where those ducks are. And hopefully Emily's going to help us with that today. Our speaker today is Emily Hicks. She's a local attorney specializing in estate planning, elder law, and asset protection strategies. She received her undergraduate degree from Florida State University. You really have to have it up to your mouth. And her law degree from Elizabeth Hogg School of Law at Pace University in New York. She started her career in New York with toxic tort litigation, and upon returning to Florida, transitioned her focus to real estate and estate matters. Over time, she realized that her true passion is at helping families protect their assets that they've worked long and hard for. She formed her own practice in 2011. On a personal note, she proudly has called the Jacksonville area her home now since 2006. She has 3 daughters, 13, 9, and 8. 13, 9, and 8, so busy life. And she and her husband live here in Ponte Vedra, enjoying an active Florida lifestyle. One other thing I want to say is that Brittany Darling is recording this for Emily today. It would be cut back of some people's heads right here, but Emily has agreed that she will give us the link for that, and we can post this to our members only section on the website. So if anyone didn't make it, they can see it, you can review it, it'll be there for you. So without further ado, let me introduce, it's my pleasure to introduce Emily Hicks. Emily, come on up.
Thank you, Cindy. Good morning. We've all survived TPC. I'm so glad when it comes, but I'm so glad when it's over too. Just gonna I'm Emily Hicks. Thank you so much for allowing me to come today. I'm here to talk about estate planning, but don't worry, I'm not going to bore you. I'm not going to, sit here and tell you all about legal documents that you already know that you need, right? Everybody knows, every adult person knows that they need to plan, for their future. So I'm not going to do that. Instead, I have a twist. I have a little bit of a twist for you, and I want to tell you how thinking about these things and planning for your estate could actually make you become a better person, a better mother, a better wife, a better friend, a better daughter. All of the roles that we play in our life, this can actually enhance your life today rather than, the benefits of it being after your passing. And, we all have goals in life. Like, I play tennis, for instance. Does anybody play tennis here or pickleball or, anything like that? Well, when you start out playing tennis, you do all the right things, right? You get the lessons and you go to clinics and you practice and you do all of these things and you have this really great vision. I have this goal of being a 4-0, tennis player like Brittany over there. And so far it hasn't happened, but I can so clearly envision that future of my tennis, playing. And same with the golf. Maybe you want to play golf. You want to be a single-digit handicap like some of the guys out there, this past week. You get your lessons, you have your plan, you really are, you have that picture of playing with those ladies. The ladies that are all so good and that it just doesn't even, they don't even try, it seems like, and they, are just able to win these golf tournaments and do these things, or, and you have that clear vision when you start out on this path. And I want to say too, with any business venture that you start, well, the first thing that you're going to do if you start a business is you're going to define your core values. That's the very first thing that you're going to do on your list of things when you start a company. And along with that is going to be your mission statement. So what I challenge everyone to think about is doing that for yourself as a person. and really coming up with, what your core values are as a mother or a wife or, whatever the roles you are playing in your life right now, and creating that mission statement for yourself. Now, in order to do that, you need a plan. You need to think about what those things are. We need to, get these things in writing and really start envisioning that legacy. Just like, I envision myself being that 4-0 tennis player, I have to do that for myself as a mother, as a wife, and as a daughter. What is the legacy going to be for me? What is it that I'm going to leave behind ultimately? I think mostly, obviously, about my children. As Cindy mentioned, I have three girls, which is a challenge in and of itself. But one that I'm, proudly taking on and doing my best with. But anytime, I talk to people about estate planning, inevitably, a lot of fear comes up for people. And I want to talk a little bit, through that, about what your fears are for the future. Is it creating entitlement in your children? That's a big one. That comes up a lot when I plan with people. Heirs, squandering inheritance, or perhaps the money falling into the wrong hands. Who's going to take care of you? There's a lot of fear with the dementia on the rise, and a lot of these, cognitive diseases. It's a big fear, thinking, what's going to happen? Maybe you're worried about having enough money for yourself. I personally want to hit 100, but how much is that going to cost? I don't know. And then family conflict. We all want our family to remain intact after we're gone, and for those relationships to be preserved. So creating entitlement, how many people, do you know, or how many people here know somebody that has perhaps been given everything in life? None of us know people like that. They've been given everything, and like the way has just been paved for them. They've never had to really struggle, and sometimes that creates a sense of entitlement in that person. It makes them unmotivated. They think that everything should be done for them, and ultimately that can result in a low self-esteem, which is something, as a mother of 3 girls, something I think about a lot. And we were just talking about that. I was just talking about that with Martha. Is creating and building self-esteem in others is just such a wonderful and important thing that you can do. And I want to tell you a story about my daughter. So my middle child plays soccer, and at the beginning of this soccer season, she went up to her coach, and this is a brand new coach to her, and she was new to this team. He had inherited some of the girls already, but she was new for him. And she goes up to him and says, I want to play center mid. And that's a really important position on the soccer. I'm not a soccer player, so just for all of us non-soccer players, that's the middle, that's kind of the really important position. And she said, I want to play center mid. And he said, ooh, we've already got a really good center mid. I don't know, kid, you can try, but, I don't really see that happening. You're going to have to beat out Sadie, who's like a really good, center mid. And she's like, okay. And, I didn't really see it at the time, but that stoked a little fire in her, okay? So that was, August. So weeks go by, she's practicing, she's working. Months go by, she's not getting her chance. And we know the coach. And my husband, they actually coached together, and previously. And I said, Kevin, who's my husband, I said, should we just talk to him? Could you maybe just say, just give her a chance, just give her one shot at it? And he said, absolutely not. I was like, oh my God. And he said, I would never take away the chance for her to earn it on her own. And I said, that's perfect. So we didn't say a word. We're not, very vocal with coaches anyway. I don't want to be that parent that's always complaining. So we don't ever say anything. And I said, well, she'll just have to get it on her own, you know. And so she kept working. Finally, she got her chance. And she did great. And then he gave her another chance. And then he gave her another chance. And after 2 months of her working and showing what she could do, at the end of a tournament, he said, we found our new center mid. And the smile on her face was something that I will never forget. I've never seen a more beautiful smile. And it just, you know, my heart just burst with pride and with happiness that she had, you know, this is a silly story in a way, but I think it really illustrates, you know, she did it herself. We didn't help her at all, you know, so now she is able to go in with confidence and know that she earned it and did it on her own. And I think that's so important when we think about what we're leaving, you know, behind for children. You know, we don't want to, as a mother, I want to make everything easy for them, right? I don't want them to suffer. I want them to be happy. I want everything to be easy. You know, it's something I think when they're babies, you get so used to doing everything for them. And it's really hard to break out of that. But, you know, it really does take a little bit away from them, doesn't it? You know, when we do it for them continuing on. So it's really hard for me to let them suffer and to let them maybe go through their lessons. But I think it's a great thing to really think about as we are planning for our legacy and how we want to be remembered and how we can set them up for a prosperous future. So, squandering inheritance is also a big fear. And this is a picture of Cornelius Vanderbilt, who was quite wealthy. He dropped out of school at age 11. I believe at 16, he borrowed some money from his mother to purchase his first boat. And then that turned into a very large fleet and then a railroad empire, okay? His estimated net worth in today's dollars was $186 billion at the time of his death, okay? He left the vast majority of his fortune to his oldest son, William Henry. And William Henry was able to double that fortune in 8 years. And that's something we don't hear a lot about. That was a new fact to me that I didn't know, that he actually doubled that fortune in 8 years, which makes the rest of the story even sadder because unfortunately, when he died in 1885, the heirs that he left this great vast fortune to began to squander it, okay? And by the early 1970s, there were 120 Vanderbilt heirs. Not one of them had $1 million. So I don't know about you, but that's a lot of squandering. That's a lot of money that has been spent on art and on, I mean, we have the Biltmore, which I'm really happy that that was done because it's very beautiful. But can you imagine squandering almost $400 billion throughout 4 or 5 generations? It's really mind-blowing. Now, and contrast that with the Rockefeller family. Now, the Rockefellers, John D. Rockefeller was a modest 16-year-old bookkeeper in Cincinnati, Ohio. His only formal training was a 10-week accounting course, and it said that his greatest ambition was to make $100,000. Okay, little did he know. 25 years later, he would be the wealthiest man of his time. And not only that, his heirs, of which there are over 200, they still have a collective net worth of about $10 billion. So what's the difference? You know, why did the Rockefeller family succeed in such a major way that the Vanderbilt family, you know, it's all of their money is gone? And there are some, just as a fun note, there are some successful Vanderbilts. I don't know if you all know Anderson Cooper, he's actually a descendant of the Vanderbilt family. His mother was Gloria Vanderbilt, if we remember. She was a fashion designer, and I believe she had a perfume line. I don't know why I remember that, but she was actually self-made though. She inherited nothing from, you know, the family. She was on the tail end of it, unfortunately for her. But then she made her own way. But The difference is the Rockefellers had a plan. You know, John D. Rockefeller was very, very intentional about creating generational wealth. And the main difference, not to bore you with all of the methods and the trusts and how they did it, is that they weren't allowed to ever really touch principal. They all live off of the income, okay? So just imagine you have an asset that's producing income, and the heirs, and you've grown it to the point where, you know, Johnny Rockefeller obviously had, you know, quite the nest egg, but he was able to set up just multiple generations only on income, and they're not allowed to really mess with the principal or the big nest egg that they could, you know, squander like the Vanderbilts were. You know, the Vanderbilts just had the money. They were unprepared for that. You know, one of the big mistakes that people make is not having heirs that are prepared to manage money. I see it a lot. You know, we had a client come in last month, and he never had anything, and his mother left him a couple $1 million. He had no clue what to do. And now he's going on a path of not, you know, not being a good steward of money, not understanding, you know, how to invest wisely, and he really wasn't prepared to even handle that. So that's really something that you want to think about, is how prepared, if you're planning on leaving money to your children, how prepared are they to handle that money? And then clear instructions for distributions. There's a really, we play with trusts a lot. And just as a side note, because I want to give you, you know, a few tips here. Everybody knows they need a will, right? Everybody's heard that a million times. Well, one thing I want to impress upon you today is if you only have a will, that will has to go through court. And then that becomes semi-public, okay? It's not as public as it used to be, but I can look up a lot of people's wills. And the unfortunate part about that is that when you leave your assets to people in a will, they can be put on what's called an inheritance list, okay? And that's a list that people can buy to then target them and, you know, so-and-so just inherited this house, or so-and-so just inherited this, and they actually become a little bit of a target because they're on the inheritance list. That's a list that you can actually purchase. Anybody can buy it. So that's something to really think about, because a will is not going to keep things private for you. If you're looking for privacy, there's other methods, and the main vehicle for that is really a trust. So the beauty of another, you know, there's a lot of great benefits to a trust, but one of the beauties of the trust is, you know, you can put so many wonderful clear distribution methods in there that make administering it a lot easier and a lot less hassle, because you don't have to go through court. So if you have, even if you have that in your will, you want a trust to be created, that then has to be administered through court, through the probate court. So it costs a lot of money. The lawyers are the ones that make out on that, okay? Because I want to tell you, you know, the fee for, just the lawyer fee for probate, you know, up to $900, I'm just going to give you rough figures because I want to keep it easy. Up to about $900,000, that's 3% that just goes to the lawyer. So if you have a $900,000 estate that goes through probate, that's 30 grand right there, just to the attorney. Okay, and that's why attorneys love probate. They do, they love it. And they're not always, unfortunately, setting you up for success on avoiding that. Most attorneys are, you know, I know. They're not all like any profession. There's good and there's bad, right? So if you are going to your lawyer, make sure that you're getting set up for success, that you're not, you know, falling into the hands of someone that's just kind of, yeah, we'll create this trust for you. We're not worried about you funding it because we're going to get the probate later, you know, and that happens. It happens a lot. And, you know, just beware and know that if you do create a trust, you actually have to, quote, fund that trust. And what that is retitling your assets into the name of the trust or leaving the trust as a beneficiary in certain instances. We're not always going to do that, but sometimes we will. So I just wanted to make that very clear. And with a trust, I mean, you can, say, okay, Johnny's going to receive half the inheritance, and before he's 35, if he wants to start a business, then he can take out a loan against his ultimate inheritance to fund that business. Or we can pay for his college or his master's or, whatever it is. We can build in so many wonderful things that can help, again, set them up for success and not just give it to them, And I sound a little harsh because most of your children, I'm sure, are going to be fine with that. They're probably good stewards of money. That you've done everything that you could do, and so I know I'm harping on that, but it happens. It happens a lot, and I think that it's really important to think about how they're going to handle that in the future. Now, maybe you're afraid of who's going to take care of you. This is Brooke Astor, and I apologize, the picture's a little fuzzy, but she probably would have wanted it to be fuzzy. She was the queen of New York. She was the socialite, queen of New York society. And she was a philanthropist. She was married 3 times. Her 3rd husband was Vincent Astor, who was a very wealthy heir, and they also had the Astor Foundation, which did a lot of philanthropic, wonderful things in New York and donated to a lot of charities. Well, she only had 1 son, and her son was from her first marriage. And so by the time she got older, he was really the only family member that she had left. Her husbands had all passed, and her husband Vincent actually left her in charge of the foundation and, made her a little bit even wealthier than she was before. And she was quite the character, very, very active in society. It was said that she was the most attractive woman you would ever meet, but she was not beautiful. But she had a very charismatic and wonderful personality. Unfortunately for her, she developed Alzheimer's. She lived quite a long time, but she developed Alzheimer's later in her life. And her son became her power of attorney, I believe it was along with her lawyer, who is not a great choice in this story either. So Tony apparently had been harboring a lot of resentment towards his mother. Maybe he didn't get enough attention, or he wasn't really happy that she wasn't giving him everything that he wanted. He was rejected by his own father as a child and really never got over it. So as he got older, he began to, as she got older, let's say, and started showing symptoms of Alzheimer's, he began to take advantage of her. He had power of attorney, so that means that he could make financial decisions for her. Well, Brooke Astor had everything really laid out. She knew exactly what the foundation was going to do. She had all of the charities laid out. She had really planned very well. But the one thing that she didn't plan on was Tony. And Tony proceeded to undo all of those plans. And he stole about $1 million. He sold her favorite paintings. He actually gifted himself her favorite home that she loved. She had really worked on the gardens. And do I have any gardeners here? Anybody that gardens? I'm a hopeless, I can kill a cactus. And I try over and over, but it doesn't. Maybe I'll develop a green thumb at some point. But a garden is something that takes years really to cultivate, right? It takes a really long time to create this beautiful, garden, which she had done, and she was very proud of it. Well, he decided that he and his 3rd wife, who Brooke Astor hated in a large way, he decided that he should give that property to them, and proceeded to do so, which means she ended up paying about $3.65 million in gift taxes that year. Now, I don't know if you guys know this, but if you give somebody a gift, it's a little bit counterintuitive because you think, if I give somebody some money, then they're the ones that pay the tax on that. No, you pay the tax. If you gift something to someone, you're paying if there is a gift tax on it, you're paying that. And this could have been so easily avoided had he been able to just calm down and wait and inherit the property like he most likely would have, because then that would have been, she wouldn't have had those taxes to pay. So now he's cost her another $3.65 million just for being selfish and impatient, okay? Had he waited and inherited the property, it actually would have been a lot better for him. This is, Tony was not a very bright bulb all the time, because if you inherit a property, let's say, we all live in Ponte Vedra. Our property values have gone up just a little bit. Just a little bit in the past few years. Let's say, and I'm going to keep the math simple. Let's say you bought your house a while ago for $200,000. Well, it's probably worth $1.2 million, or something in that range now. I mean, the value has increased, dramatically. Well, if you decide during your lifetime that you just want to give that property to someone, they're going to get what's called the basis that you have, which is $200,000, meaning they're going to have $1 million of gain for capital gains taxes. Now, if you decide to leave it to them and they inherit the property, they get what's called a step-up in basis, meaning that they're going to inherit it at the fair market value of $1.2 million. If they turn around and sell it, they don't have any capital gains tax because they have what's called the step-up in basis. I'm not going to bore you with taxes today. I promise I'm not here to do that. But that's a significant benefit to them, is letting them inherit it and getting the step-up in basis. That's a really huge difference, especially for all of us who live in Ponte Vedra, because we probably bought our house for a lot less than it's worth now. So that's something to think about, and that's something that Tony could have thought about and could have actually benefited for himself, but he was selfish, he was angry, he was looking to get back at his mother. So what resulted was an incredibly public scandal. He was indicted, he actually went to prison, and luckily for her, there's a little bit of a bright side to this story. She had a couple of really good friends, one of which was a Rockefeller. They did it right. One of which was a Rockefeller, the other one was a De La Renta, and she actually got guardianship over Brooke Astor at the end of her life, and she was able to live her last year very peacefully, very calmly, in the way that she was surrounded by a garden, maybe not her favorite, but on another estate. And she, at least had that little bit of peace of mind her last year of her life. In fact, she did such a good job as a guardian that the judge in the case wrote a letter to her a year after Brooke Astor died and said he had never seen somebody do such a good job as a guardian, and that she was an example, a shining example of what a guardian can actually do for someone, which is a really wonderful thing. Now, outlasting your money. Let's talk about what care actually costs nowadays. Genworth produces a study every year, and this is for 2023. It just came out for Ponte Vedra / Jacksonville area. Now, not surprisingly, our area is a little more expensive than most. Shocker. It's a little more, than the norm. But we're looking at, quite a bit of cost when you're talking about home health care, and you're talking about certainly when you're talking about nursing home care and skilled nursing care, which unfortunately a lot of people end up needing at the end of life due to cognitive decline and cognitive diseases that are on the rise. And I can tell you just personally, it's nothing for me to see a $12,000 a month bill for some of my clients. Like that's just the norm now. So it's something to think about, outlasting your money. Are we invested, maybe the way we need to be? I'm not an investment advisor. I'm just telling you this because unfortunately a lot of people come to me when it's too late. and they get a lot of really bad advice. And there's a lot of ways that we can protect your money from, these types of costs as well. But I'm not going to get into all of that today because we're focusing on family. But it's something to think about. It's a very real fear and a real cost that is occurring and is not going down, unfortunately. And family conflict. So I want to tell you this story about this woman named Shauna. And Shauna's mother had breast cancer, and she had a mastectomy. She went through chemo. Shauna was her primary caretaker of her at the time, and then unfortunately ended up developing into lung cancer, had to go through chemo again, and she ended up dying at age 67 to lung cancer. Now, Shauna was involved in the estate planning, during all of this time. She thought she knew what to expect. She had been, with her mom to the lawyer. She had, been a little bit, part of the planning process. She had helped her. Obviously, she was, the one who was taking care of her, so she knew what was going on. Well, after her mother died, a completely different version of the trust was administered. And she was shocked, and she was surprised and thought to herself, what is this? Because the version of the trust that actually was administered at that point was shockingly different, and Shauna was actually cut out of a lot of inheritance. The date on that amendment was about a week before her mother died. So Shauna had 2 older brothers and 1 younger sister. The younger sister never really, I think always maybe had a little bit of jealousy, something like that. Her older brother and her sister had gotten together with the mother, unbeknownst to Shauna, went and did another change, cut her out of a bunch of, a lot of, property and things like that she thought she was going to inherit. And for her, it wasn't about the money. She wasn't worried about, the property or how much it was, going to be for her as far as her personal wealth. It was a betrayal, and it was a complete, it just hurt her in such a deep way that her mother would do that to her. And then after someone's gone, we've all probably have all lost someone in this room. You can't talk to them anymore. You can't say, what the heck happened? Why did you do this? So there's a lot of stuff that goes unresolved with that. However, she could confront her brother and sister, right? And the response that she got was basically, we need it more than you do. And so what ended up happening was just a complete division in the family. And she never spoke to them again until she unfortunately died. When she died, the legacy that she left was quite different. She had learned the lesson very painfully through her mother of what that can do to a family. And she was determined that everything about her life and her legacy was going to be fairness, and was going to be kindness, and was going to keep the family together. And I'm happy to report that her daughters are still best friends. There was no family fallout. Everything, turned out just fine. I'm a great lover of history, and I know we have some people who love history here. I also love family history, but I'm not going to tell you about my family history, I promise, because it's not, it's not interesting to anyone but ourselves, right? But, has anyone ever done Ancestry? Have you kind of looked? And a lot of our stuff in our family was already done, and I kind of knew what it was about. But I did the DNA test. And I'm not going to go in a weird place here. But my parents had done it, and so I thought, oh, my parents are here. These are obviously my closest relatives. And then this other guy popped up. And I thought, well, who's this guy? I don't even know who this is. He's my closest living relative, other than my parents, and I had no idea. I thought, why don't I know this person? And the reason that I don't know this person is because Shauna was my mother, and this is her sister's son. And he's my closest living relative. I've never met him. So that's the kind of generational impact you can have on a family, where I have an entire side of the family that I don't know, never talked to, have no idea what they're doing, And that's unfortunate. That's really unfortunate. And that's, a very unintended legacy that my grandmother left, is a family that is divided and never speaks to each other and isn't, together anymore. And it's a very intentional thing that my mother did, was make sure everything was well planned out. We had a trust, we had everything sealed up, everything was kind of ready for when the time came. And unfortunately for her, she also died at the age of 67, very young. And it was, it's hard enough. It's hard enough to go through that. But it's so much easier when it's well planned out. And, I tell you this story because it's really why I turned to this area of law. It was very hurtful and very painful. My mother became very depressed after that, and it was a really hard time for her. And I thought to myself, gosh, I never want to see people go through that. And we see it so often as how that can tear apart families. And when I started in law, I started for a big corporation, and I hated it because I thought, I'm not making a really good impact here. And I was able to get myself out of that and go into something that actually really matters, which is helping families and helping you all, think about the future and hopefully become a better person now by planning for what you want your legacy to be later on. So I challenge you to do that. Become better now. If we can define our values, if we can set our goals, and hopefully create a very intentional, wonderful legacy, then I really think that we can impact our family for generations and make them as successful as they can be. So thank you all for listening. If anyone has any, thank you. Anyone has any questions?
Can you talk a little bit more about trust versus will and how that affects your heirs and? Can you repeat the question?
So she would like to know the difference between a trust and a will and how that can impact the heirs, right?
I know what a trust is, but I didn't know that what's left in his will kind of leaves your relatives up for being right up close. I know the difference between a will and a trust, but I didn't know that your heirs are sort of affected by inheriting in a will versus a trust.
So the difference between if you just have a will, then what happens is the will has to go through the probate court, okay? Everything has to be, and you better hope that it doesn't have a staple mark on it or a mark on it or you cross something out, because guess what? You may have a problem with that getting admitted. When you have a will, you have to think of it. We ever watch any crime shows? Think of it, when they put everything, they have their gloves on and they put it in a plastic bag and it's a part of a crime scene. That's kind of how you want to think about your will, honestly. You want it to be, it's a piece of evidence is really what it is. And, with lawyers, it's kind of a joke with probate. It's a lawsuit that you file against yourself for the benefit of your creditors. So when you have a will, that will has to be administered by the court, and the personal representative, whomever you have nominated, has to be approved. They have to be 18, they can't have a criminal record, they have to be a Florida resident unless it's a very close relative. So all of these things, have to take place. It's just very formal. And if there's an issue with that will, it may not even get admitted. And if, if there's a problem, then they can say, this isn't valid. And we're gonna go through the laws of intestacy, which is the state of Florida plan, which you may not have intended, you may not want. So, it's not a bad thing, it's a costly thing, it's a little bit more up in the air. I will say this, if you have a will, it's very easy to contest a will. It's very, very easy. With a trust, it's a little bit different. A trust is going to be private. It's not going to have to go through court administration, most likely. I'm speaking generally, but you know what I mean. I have to give you the lawyer disclaimer. It's not, everything is kept within the family, and then whomever you nominate as your successor trustee, they can step in during your incapacity. So if something were to happen to you, they can step in right away. They can obviously step in after your death, and they will go on business as usual, and nothing else has to happen. You don't have to get any court intervention on that. And that means a lot less lawyer fees and court fees and things like that. So it's really something to think about. I'm a big believer in let's avoid probate if we can. It's very easy to do. It really is. There's some tips and some tricks to it. And I'm happy to, share all of those with you because it's unnecessary and it's costly and your family can just get on with it, rather than being dragged through the court. And Florida's not necessarily a probate-friendly state. It takes a long time. It takes months and months. If anyone's ever been through it, you probably know that.
So I think one of the questions to kind of tag on.
Right up to my mouth.
So one of the things to kind of tag on to that question is sort of the difference between, and we had this experience which was unpleasant, that a lot of attorneys will say, oh, we've created this trust, but it funds based through the will. Well, then you have to go to probate, and it's versus the other. And I think that's a little sneaky thing that creates an annuity for that lawyer to continue to work with you. I mean, you can talk a little bit about that.
I hate to bash my profession, but I'm about to bash my profession a little bit. They're not always setting you up for success. I mean, that's a sad reality. You got to make sure your trust is funded. And that's just it's a sneaky old trick that's been around for a long time, along with keeping originals. One of the things that lawyers have historically done is keep the originals. And the reason that they do that is so you have to go back to them. They have everything, so you got to go back to them to administer it or make any changes or do whatever. There's a lot of practices like that people kind of inherited through the years. But fortunately, I had a great mentor. He did everything the right way, and he taught me how other people did it. And then he said, this is how you should do it. You give them the originals. You don't, you make sure their trust is funded. You help them with that process. And that's one of the relationship doesn't end once you sign on the dotted line. It continues, through the questions that you may have about, what do I do with this life insurance policy? Or, what do I do with this account? What about my IRA? So you really, we give you very detailed instructions on that, but it's so important that you fund your trust because otherwise you're going to court. You're going through probate. When you die, and the reason for that is, just think about it like this. If you die and you have an asset, let's say a house, in your personal name, there's no other way to transfer title to that asset anymore, that it then becomes part of your estate in the bubble. There's no way for you to sign anything after your death. So a judge has to do it, basically. It has to be administered through a legal process for the title to change. Now, what we're doing with a trust essentially is we're retitling it ahead of time into another entity that you control, you can change. Nothing really changes for you, except for your writing trustee now of the trust, but nothing really changes. You're not filing another tax return for that. It's your personal property. It's going to be through your social security number. It's quite easy. Just a few titles are going to change. But it's imperative that you do that, because otherwise it's for nothing. So yeah, and unfortunately there's a lot of attorneys out there that are not going to set you up for success, and I just want you to be aware of that, moving forward.
All right, and that back here?
Just a quick question. You have a ring that you got from your grandmother that you want to make sure goes to a specific niece. I mean, you would still need a will for things like that, I would assume.
You can do it either way. Even with a trust, we have, the way it works is you are going to assign, we're going to do an assignment of personal property. So we're going to assign all of that, the rings, the jewelry is always very important. I have a ring from my grandmother as well. And, you want to make sure it's all fair, right? So you're going to assign all of your personal property to your trust, and then you're going to have instructions. It's a very easy addendum of personal property, and you can say, I want Jane to get this. I want so-and-so. For those types of items, yes. The more clear, you could be, the better.
You gave me some new information. Obviously, we all live in Florida, but our executor lives in Tennessee.
Oh, yeah.
Will that not be legal in Florida? You said that.
Are they a close relative?
Yes.
Then you should be fine.
Okay.
If it's a very close relative, then you can have that person. But if it's a friend, then it needs to be a Florida resident.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Does Florida require a pour-over will?
Oh, I'm sorry.
A pour-over will to keep?
For the trust. So that's a good question, because what we do when we create an estate plan for somebody, I create a trust for them, and then we do what's called a pour-over will, and basically it's like a backup. It's saying just in case this trust, everything didn't get funded in the way this trust states, then we instruct the court to follow the instructions in the trust. And that's essentially what a pour-over will is. Yes, absolutely. Yeah, it's so much of it is about kind of covering all of your bases. You want to make sure if this happens, then let's make sure we have this. And if this gets lost, then we're going to have this. So we really look at it as a whole and try to, plan on any type of contingency that may occur. But yeah, absolutely.
You keep bringing up funding the trust. I don't understand what that means.
I know. When you say trust fund, doesn't that it resonates a type of image, doesn't it? It's like, I know. So funding a trust is basically, we really should call it retitling. That's all it is. When you quote fund a trust, what you're doing is retitling your asset into the name of the trust. So a house, for instance, what we would do is deed that from yourself to yourself as trustee of the Jane Doe Trust. So that's all it is retitling certain assets into the name of the trust, or making that trust the beneficiary of certain accounts in certain situations. We don't want to do that in every situation, but yes. So we look at, everybody's family is different, and everybody has different types of assets and things like that. So we look at each individual thing because they're treated differently. But a home is a really good example, because we're just going to deed that from yourself as a person to yourself as trustee of the trust, and that essentially avoids probate.
We have time for just a couple more questions.
So hard to decide.
But come talk to me later if I can't answer.
How do you avoid paying inheritance tax?
That's a good question. So inheritance tax, Florida doesn't actually have an inheritance tax. We don't have a state tax. The federal estate tax is what you want to look at in Florida. Now, right now, we have a very high federal estate tax exemption. It's like $13 million. So that means you can leave about $13 million to someone tax-free right now. Now, I will say, and that's just individually, if you're married, that's double. That it's incredibly high and it's historically high, and you know, it used to be like 600,000 and then it was 1 million, and it has gone just skyrocketed in the past. Well, Donald Trump doubled everything when he was in office. But I will say, it is set to what's called sunset at the end of 2025. So that's going to go back down to $5 million per person, which with inflation we estimate is going to be maybe closer to $7 million still per person. So that's what you're looking at with estate tax. So it's just going to be a federal estate tax. We don't have anything to worry about in the state of Florida, which is a wonderful benefit of living here, and probably why everyone is moving here, because we have a great tax law, so we don't, you know, we have a lot of benefits to that. But if you are looking, you know, at that, if you are going to be over the limit, there are things that we can do. Planning with trust is going to be very important for you. So that's something that you want to definitely, you know, look into if you're going to be over the limit.
Okay. Here, you know, we'll take 3 more.
What is the difference between putting your home in a revocable and an irrevocable trust?
A revocable trust is going to be one like we're talking about right now. So that's going to be one that you're going to be able to make any kind of changes to. So a revocable trust is not going to give you any asset protection. When you hear the word trust, you think it's going to be protected from creditors and from, you know, no one can touch it. That's not really true. A revocable trust isn't set up for that. It's really set up to avoid probate. That's pretty much it. Okay, you're not going to get any asset protection from that. Now, an irrevocable trust is going to be something that's going to be set up that you cannot change. You are no longer going to have any control over that asset. Therefore, it is going to be asset protected for you if you're the beneficiary, because you have no control over it. So an easy way to think about it is, for asset protection wise, if you control something and you are able to, you know, have dominion over it, if you're able to take money from it, if you have any control over it, it's not going to be protected. It's not going to be asset protected for you, meaning from creditors or from, you know, bankruptcy, you know, anything like that. But if you don't have any control over it, and this is something that we're talking about like with the Rockefellers, you know, the reason they still have all of the money is they didn't have any control. You know, the heirs don't have any control over the principal, let's say, of what the assets are. They just receive the income, and that keeps it asset protected. So there are things that we can do that if you are worried about that, you know, but it's a good way to think of it is, if you have any control over it and it's revocable, you know, it's just going to be part of your estate. If it's irrevocable, you don't have control over it, you're not going to be the trustee, and you're not going to be able to change it. So that's the difference.
Okay, I have the microphone, so I'm going to ask a question. So if you're funding your trust, you're married, do you split the assets up? Some in each name trust? Is that how you have to do it?
If you're married and most of your assets are going to be held jointly, we do a joint revocable trust. You can do individual ones if you have a lot of assets that, you know, maybe you inherited, or, you know, if you have a need for that and you want to do individual trust, we can certainly do that too. It doesn't really matter so much, but most people that are married, they have their assets jointly. You know, you own your home jointly and your bank accounts and stuff like that. So we'll usually do a joint revocable trust.
So at the point when it's not important to separate them if you're worried about that $5 million limit.
Now that's a different story.
That's what I'm asking.
Okay. Yes, that's a different story. So there will be different types of trusts that we would set up in that situation, depending on.
Okay, I don't want you to get too far into it. I know it's kind of.
I mean, I'd be happy to talk to you on an individual basis.
Okay. All right.
it can get a little bit complicated, so that's why I want to keep it where you won't want to run me out of here.
You may have partly answered my question. So you talked about how, I guess it was Rockefeller, they can't touch the actual asset, they can only live off of it. Now, how did they do that? In the irrevocable trust?
That's right.
And then do you have to, excuse me, do you have to pay somebody to manage that?
You do.
So
That's the downside of that. Yeah, I'm sure they have a team of lawyers and financial, people that administer that for them, which you can do. Generally, if you have a trust company, let's say, that's managing assets for you, they're going to require quite a bit of assets, for you. At least $2 or $3 million is kind of on the low, at least, that they'll even take to manage someone's property. It's going to be about 2% per year of what they're managing. That's a little on the high side. You may can get it for a little bit less than that. But yeah, you do have to pay for that. Or you can appoint somebody else,
I'm a trustee on an irrevocable trust. I don't get any money for what I do.
Yeah.
Family.
Yeah.
But by law, you could charge. By law, I could charge, but that would then diminish the asset.
Right.
And my mother is the recipient of the income from the investment kind of thing. So
Yeah.
you don't have to have, now I'm not talking about $3 billion, but
Like a generation's giving trust or something.
this is, okay.
A lot of times, that's such a good point, because a lot of times when we set up an irrevocable trust for somebody, perhaps we're planning on, some things for long-term care and to protect some assets that may eventually we want to keep from going to the state of Florida, then that's a perfect example of an irrevocable trust that we can set up, where usually it's going to be the kids that are the trustees for the benefit of the parents or the mom or dad. So yeah, it does not have to be a corporation. In that instance, I'm sure that the Rockefellers have, some pretty good people looking after theirs. But generally, you can set it up to where a family member can do that. It's just, obviously you want that person to be, a good steward of money and someone that you trust implicitly, to act in your best interest. And I just want to say too, I told you kind of some scary stories, but with the power of attorney and with the trustee, when you nominate someone for that, they have a fiduciary duty to you, which means they have to act in your best interest, and they can be liable for that. So, it's not carte blanche where just, oh, here you go, you have access to everything, but it certainly is something to take very seriously.
All right, we could go on all day. I know, there's that many questions.
Thank you guys so much.
Thank you, Emily.